There's a battle between digital native brands and national retailers with brick and mortar presence. And while there's room for both to sell on the platform, today we look at how digital native brands need to compete on Amazon or risk losing ground to thousands of entrepreneurs. My name is Stephen Pope, and this is the My Amazon Guy podcast. I'm now joined by James Thomson. He's the Buy Box Experts and Prosper Show founder, as well as author of the Amazon Marketplace Dilemma. It's my pleasure to have you on the show today. Thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me on today, Stephen.
So for my listeners, whether you're a digital brand or a brick and mortar, there's going to be some good information today. James, you've got a Ph.D. in marketing. I'm excited to tap into your knowledge and your skill set on the podcast today. So let's first define what we're talking about. We got digital native brand versus brick and mortar. So James, can you weigh in and define these for us?
So I like to think of digitally native brands. We typically hear Amazon private label seller. These are companies that are building brands and selling them, at least initially, on the Amazon channel. So companies that find a way to, they find a product gap somewhere on Amazon and they say, I can get a product made that will fill that gap. Often they go overseas to find a manufacturer who will make that product. And then that seller is responsible for building a brand, building traffic, building sales, protecting those sales, and typically rinsing and repeating that process over time. That's your digitally native brand as we think of on Amazon. With traditional brands, what I'll call brands that are born offline, your typical national manufacturer brands, products that might be distributed in traditional retail settings. Those types of companies are waking up to the opportunities of selling online. Companies that have historically used either brick and mortar retailers or distributors to get their products to consumers. Certainly the COVID crisis has created a situation where they realize, goodness me, if consumers are shopping online and we don't have good representation there, there's a big issue. We also see with some of these non-digitally native brands, more of these national brands, we see a situation where they look at Amazon as yet another channel in which they sell. Well, if I want to sell into this retailer, I send my sales team down and we go have a conversation. Selling on Amazon doesn't work that way, as you know well. And so thinking about how do you play in the Amazon sandbox and how do you learn how to play well in that sandbox, that's a big, big challenge for some of these national brands when they're competing with very nimble, very knowledgeable, smaller private label brands that thrive on the Amazon channel. I like to use the term when I'm talking to some of these bigger brands. I say, your lunch is being eaten by a bunch of companies you've never heard of. And by the way, they're going to keep eating your lunch because A, you haven't learned how to play in the Amazon space. And number two, you're not thinking about the unique pressures that online marketplaces like Amazon are creating for your traditional brick and mortar channels. We hear about unauthorized sellers every day where national brands wake up one day and discover who are all these people selling our products on Amazon. And no idea who they are. Absolutely. And it's not that the brand said, we would like to designate sellers we've never heard of. It's more a matter of the brand didn't really take the channel seriously, realize how much volume there is, but also as an open marketplace, Amazon basically welcomes everyone and anyone to sell in that market. I used to run Amazon Services, which is the group that would recruit all these people onto the channel. So I like to say to some of the brands I talk to, I'm the guy that recruited all the unauthorized sellers that end up ultimately selling your product. The reality is, as an open marketplace, anybody can sell the products. And we have some very specific laws in this country that, for the most part, protect gray market sellers, unauthorized sellers to sell products on a channel like Amazon. And so what ends up happening is the brand gets very frustrated that not only are all these companies they've never heard of selling their products, but the branding that's being used to represent these brands may not be good. There's typically some price erosion that happens on Amazon, and you end up with products being sold on Amazon at prices that are cheaper than what the brand would like to see in other channels. I've had clients where I had one particular client where things got so bad on Amazon with unauthorized seller activity that they were not able to sign up additional distributors because the distributors said,
why would I want to sell that?
We're basically wholesaling products from you at prices that leave absolutely no margin for us to resell it to retailers. We have no interest in participating here. So even if Amazon is a small part of your overall sales, it creates so many channel management problems for you that are going to come back to your core brick and mortar channels, that if you don't figure out how to deal with Amazon and have an actively managed Amazon channel strategy, you're going to end up with a big mess on your hands on Amazon, but more importantly, a really big mess in your brick and mortar channels.
A lot of the times when I'm helping out clients who have primarily been manufacturer wholesale focus, and I use this following metaphor to help them understand what it's like to transition as they think about Amazon distribution network. It's like being the difference between being a Costco, everything's this nice, neat pallet section, versus running a Kroger, and it's clean up on aisle 7 every single day. And as they go through those motions, they realize it's a completely different ball game. And like you mentioned, one of those things that they have to clean up is distribution control.
So if I go into the grocery store and I walk down to the cereal aisle, there might be 150 brands of cereal. Maybe it's 50 brands. I don't know. It's a lot of options. And as a consumer, I have a lot of choice to pick from. But every one of those brands had to pay a slotting fee to get on that shelf, and to get on the eye level shelf, the shelf below the eye level shelf, the shelf on the floor, or the shelf way at the top. But there's a pecking order that happened. And for most brands, they know how to play that slotting game. They know how to pay up or pay down for placement. They know how to work through distributors. If you're a grocery brand, you go to UNFI and you get distribution into different grocery stores. It's a well understood business. And as a salesperson selling into one of those channels, you know how that game is played. Well, along comes the Amazon marketplace, and the rules are totally different. And by the way, it's not only 50 to 150 brands trying to get in the space. It's every brand imaginable, including a bunch of brands you've never heard of. And by the way, it's not just the brands, it's every Tom, Dick, and Harry who can get their hands on the product, setting up a third-party seller account.
Yep.
Exactly. And some of these side hustles become $100 million a year businesses. So there's a lot of sophistication, data scraping, data compilation, sifting through, finding the needles in the haystack, figuring out how to source products from deep, dark corners. That's capitalism in overcharge. It's pretty amazing what's happening. I think back to when I left Amazon and started working with companies that had what I would describe, unusual sourcing strategies. Nobody talks about those types of approaches in business school.
No, they do
It's
not.
kind of like, oh, you're going to do this, you're going to do this, you're going to do this, or you're going to build a sophisticated network of companies that are going to provide you with product, in the deep of cover, and you're going to be able to sell them, and how to sell products, high volume, low margin. It's a whole new world out there that brands really have no idea about. I had a client meeting once where I went in, and not only did I show them how sophisticated the product diverters were and how much price erosion it was creating, I actually handed them a spec sheet of what one of their supposedly authorized distributors was willing to sell me off the books, any of these products at these different prices. And the brand literally freaked out. And I said, I only got one of these, but I could get more of these. This is how easy it is. And everybody in the room said, how is this possible? I'll tell you how it's possible. If you're a national brand and you're used to working through what we call a two-stage distribution model, where you've got a distributor who then in turn recruits retailers, you understand how to sell product to the distributor, and then it's the distributor's problem to figure out how to get it out there. Well, the problem is the distributor may not necessarily be aligned with you in the sense that they may be selling to people you don't want them to sell to, or you as the brand manufacturer, you may have sold them product and actually give them incentive to overbuy because they get volume discounts. That overbuying results in extra inventory that they have an incentive to divert somewhere else. And as the brand, you've basically created bad habits
and
the wrong kind
those
of
bad
incentive.
habits.
Exactly. So as Amazon becomes a more significant channel for consumers, it's not about, hey, Amazon's only 5% of my total sales. It's about, what do the pressures from the Amazon channel do to create the wrong kind of incentives throughout all of my distribution? So when I go in and talk to a brand, the first question is, tell me about how you do distribution. Who has access to product? What restrictions do you put on who can sell to whom? How do you track who's got what inventory? Do you lose track of where the product ultimately goes? What we quickly find is the Amazon marketplace is basically set up to take advantage of all these challenges that brands have in keeping track of their distribution.
Your margin is my opportunity, as Jeff would say.
That's part of it, but it's also your distribution mistakes create my marketplace. And so if you're not going to tightly control distribution, you're going to be in a situation where you're going to have price erosion, you're going to have inconsistent messaging, you're going to have a lot of crazy stuff that goes on. At the same time, these digitally native brands who only sell through their own accounts, they don't distribute through others, they've got tight control over branding, tight control over distribution. Tight control over distribution means tight control over pricing. If you've got the right kind of advertising on Amazon, because you know how to do Amazon advertising effectively, essentially you want to drive traffic to high converting listings that will convert well, that will allow you to index well in organic search and get yourself to a place where not only do you do well on the paid search side, but you're also winning in organic search. If you want to scare the living daylights out of a major brand, type in the generic keywords on Amazon that probably best describe their product. And then look at all the brands that show up on page one that the big national brand has never heard of. And say, that's your competition. These guys know how to play in this space. And while Amazon is a small channel for the overall national brand, on the Amazon channel, you're getting your butt kicked every day. And you either had no idea what was happening, or you may be selling some decent volume, creating opportunity for these private labelers to learn how to make a better mousetrap out of the products that you've otherwise been selling. So it's so completely different from what national brands are used to that you can't hand off the responsibility to somebody else without some level of oversight. Otherwise, all these digitally native brands will win the game.
So before we talk solutions, we did a good job here of setting up the inherency and the problems that the brick and mortars face. Let's talk about the digital native brands. What kind of struggles do you think they have?
Well, for most digitally native brands, there's a couple of big issues I see. Number one, they don't set up the proper infrastructure in the first place. They basically say, I'm going to go and buy a batch of stuff. I'm going to dip my toe in the water, see if I can get some sales happening, see if I can figure out how this Amazon thing works. Unfortunately, that often doesn't work.
You mean the action doesn't dictate the strategy, as Gary Vee would say?
You basically have to jump in head first.
Yeah.
But before you jump in, you have to understand what is the lay of the land. It's kind of like jumping into a lake in the middle of the woods. How deep is the lake? How cold is the lake? How much pollution is in the lake? I got to know these things before I jump in the lake. Well, with many private label sellers on Amazon, they say, I took a course. I understand how to go find a product gap. I'm going to go fill it with my product. I'm going to see how it goes. But I'm not going to invest in a trademark. I'm not going to invest in GS1 UPCs. I'm not going to figure out whether my product can get a design patent, and if so, file that paperwork. I'm not going to get trademarks in other countries. I'm going to basically just say, I got a batch of widgets. I'm going to slap my white label brand name on it. I'm going to see if I can sell it and make a buck. Well, what happens if it works? What happens is if it works, you've actually created a problem for yourself, because the more successful your private label brand becomes, not only is it a target for every knockoff artist out there, including all the legitimate private label sellers who look at your product and say, I could make a better version for cheaper, for a nickel less, and sell it on Amazon because I know how to play the Amazon game better than you do. But it's also a situation where if your brand name is important, or you do want to have a patent, and you don't get those things initially, you're at a major legal disadvantage when a few months down the road, you actually try to file for all this paperwork. There are companies overseas who literally sit there and look for products that are selling well, and then they file the in-country trademark for those brand names. So if you're XYZ brand here in the United States, and let's say you did get the trademark in the United States, and you're saying, I want to figure out how I can do other things, expand my markets and so on, but I can't get my trademark in Europe because somebody grabbed it first. I can't get it in China where the product's actually made because somebody grabbed it first. It turns out if I don't even own the trademark in the country where I'm having the product manufactured, some of my legal rights and my ability to counter, potential counterfeiters in the future, it becomes very hard to do certain things. And so when I think about these challenges that private label sellers have, you have to be willing to say, I'm all in the sense that I'm prepared to spend the proper money to get my trademarks up front domestically and potentially in a couple of key international markets. I'm going to get a design patent if that's relevant for my product. I'm going to invest in high quality product listings to make sure I get proper organic search. I'm willing to invest in having an IP attorney, having somebody who's actually going to help me do enforcement if necessary, who's going to actually track to see if my products are being knocked off in other places around the world. These types of activities are expensive, but they're the kinds of things you need to work into your budget if you're actually going to jump in to being a private label seller.
So there's a lot of room between I'm just getting started out of my garage and then the leap that we just talked about. And so how do you find that bright line? It's like, when should I do these things? What's your take on that?
So for most private label products, there is no design patent capability for the product. We're basically all making better mousetraps.
Co-opting demand. I'm with you.
There's a slice of pie that I want for myself. The pie's already there. Let me see if I can sneak in and grab a little piece of it. Okay, fine. So first step is you've got to get your trademark, your U.S. trademark at a minimum. You are not a brand on Amazon. From Amazon's perspective, you are not a brand until you have a trademark and you can go and get yourself registered in the brand registry program. But if you have plans to have the product made in another country, get the trademark in that country as well. So for those of us who are, manufacturing products in China, get your trademark in the US, get the trademark in China as well. Yep, it's more money, it's more cost, it's more time, but you got to do it. Because again, the worst thing that can happen to you is you're successful. And now you have a different problem on your hands of how do you actually protect your intellectual property when you didn't invest in that properly at the beginning of the discussion.
So the China trademark and some of that information, do you have a recommended resource of information we could maybe put in the notes or comments to send them to your site?
So I'm not a lawyer. I don't do intellectual property work. There are a number of lawyers that do this kind of work. I'm happy to share names with you. The reality is I don't have any preferences to who you look for. You literally need to look for, international IP attorney, but start with a US IP attorney. And most of them have contacts with folks in other countries who can get you the right paperwork that you need to do in those places.
So I've seen in the last 12 months, I've seen a big shift. Ever since Brand Registry 2.0, we've seen that sellers are now taking trademarks seriously. And I think, probably 98% of the sellers I work with have a trademark at this stage. And if they don't, they've got one on the way. So I think the sellers are there on that, the digital native ones, that is.
Yes.
All right. So let's talk about the big brick and mortar brands and some of their problems you'd mentioned. Distribution control was absolutely the main focus of that. Is there like a one-page short agreement I can hand out to the distribution network and say, hey, I promise not to sell this on Amazon. I promise not to sell this to somebody else that will sell it on Amazon. How does that work?
So every company has different distribution arrangements in place. The history of what they've done to this point with their retailers and distributors is going to play into what can be enforced, how quickly this big ship can be turned towards a model where the brand is actually in control of distribution. So there are attorneys who specialize in online reseller policies. To be clear, most most national brands, they have some kind of pricing policy. Maybe they have a minimum advertised policy, pricing policy, a MAP policy. That doesn't do squat for you when you're dealing with an Amazon-like marketplace. You're not worried about authorized sellers. You should be worried about unauthorized sellers who have they're not going to abide by a MAP policy because they're not authorized. And so you need to be thinking about how do you give yourself protection against what unauthorized sellers might do to degrade your brand. Think of it this way. Anybody that can get their hands on product of yours and sell it on Amazon, they're in it to make a buck. They're not in it to invest in building your brand. They're in it to take a pallet they bought here and turn around and make 20-30% on that sale. That's what they want to do.
It's almost retail arbitrage at that stage.
Well, we think of retail arbitrage as being walking into a store and buying it. But if I buy stuff directly from a distributor who's not really supposed to sell it to me, but is happy to do so because you gave them a volume discount, incenting them to buy too much inventory, you've basically you've dug your own grave here, which is all too often what happens with national brands. So what ends up happening is the brand doesn't realize that it's actually driving a lot of the behavior they're trying to prevent. And often the behavior they're trying to prevent is being caused by incenting the sales team at the brand to do the kinds of things that ultimately end up hurting the brand. If you incent your sales team to sell, 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 sell versus sell, 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 but let's also protect our long-term brand equity and make sure that the people we sell to are actually selling to the places we have given them permission to sell to. If none of that follow-up enforcement and policing is happening, then you're going to be in a situation where the sales team will do what you incented them to do, which is to sell, and potentially to look the other way if they need to meet their quarterly numbers.
I kind of feel like you're talking about culture in a way, and shifting culture is not easy. So that sell, sell, sell culture versus the sell, sell, protect culture. So you've probably participated in shifting that culture. How difficult is it?
Well, first of all, it's an executive team discussion. This is not done with the director of e-commerce and the director of sales. This is done with the CEO of the company, where you basically say, listen, for you to protect your long-term brand equity, which means creating and maintaining stable pricing, stable delivery of the same types of features and benefits of your product across all channels, ensuring that you don't unknowingly create an incentive for consumers to buy through one channel because you don't properly police that. If you actually want to create consistency, then you need to make the decision of who's going to represent your brand, whether that's specific distributors, specific retailers, and some of them are not going to follow the rules. And if they're not going to follow the rules that you put in place around who can do what where, then you need to be prepared to punish or fire them. And if you're not prepared to do that, even if you've known them for 20 years and they've helped you grow to this point, if they're not willing to play by the rules that will ultimately protect your brand long term, you don't want them as partners. It doesn't make sense, because it only takes one distributor or one retailer with access to a lot of product who ends up diverting it or reselling it under a doing business as name on Amazon to create all this havoc. So you need to be willing to learn to say no and to stand by the no, meaning you're going to get rid of some people who aren't playing by the new rules. So that is typically a discussion that happens with the executive level team, where everybody puts the big brand hat on, not the sales hat on or the e-commerce hat, but the brand hat on. We can always change incentive structures. We can always change that. What we can't do is be in a situation where parts of the company are doing one thing that helps the brand and other people in the company are doing things that inherently hurt the brand and expect that they're going to get along with each other. So you've got to put the big brand hat on and say, we need to protect our branding long term. We need to protect what consumers expect from us in all channels. And to do that, you need to take back control. For every one of these manufacturers that has basically delegated distribution and branding consumers, has delegated that to retailers or distributors, it's a surprise. And it's kind of awkward to say, okay, I guess I kind of have to be to some level direct to consumer involved in that process, even though that's not the way I've been for the last 40 years.
So how long does that shift take? It sounds pretty difficult, but you've been through that motion before. Yeah. Is this a 1 month deal and everything magically fixed, or is this like a 12-month investment process?
It typically takes between 6 and 12 months, depending on how many retailers you have, depending on how many countries you're being sold into, depending on how broad your catalog is. Keep in mind that even if you build an online reseller policy, even if you take control of your branding and use brand registry to lock down content on Amazon, to clean up retailer created listings and so on, even if you do all of that, the big unknown in all of this is how much unsold inventory is sitting out there in the arms of unauthorized sellers or distributors who may be diverting to someone else. You have no idea how much inventory is unsold sitting out there. And once you put policy changes in place and you start to enforce those, what you'll discover is there's a bunch of people holding inventory that want to get rid of it as fast as they can because they don't want to be in a situation where they have legal liabilities for selling your product.
And boom, goes down the price.
So typically there is a short-term price decline, and everybody has to hold their breath and say, we got it. It's called people dumping inventory so they can get as much cash out of it as quickly as possible before the lawyers get involved and start coming after some of those sellers. So you're in a situation where it's going to get worse before it gets better, but typically things get much, much better within 9 to 12 months. And what happens is the brand says, oh my goodness, not only have we cleaned up our Amazon channel, but we've actually cleaned up the way we think about distributing in all channels. And we're in a much better place, not only to be able to keep growing our Amazon channel, but we can now explore other online channels. We can also keep our distributors and retailers much happier if they're focused on, selling into brick and mortar, and those brick and mortar channels don't have problems where they can see that prices are always cheaper on Amazon. It makes it a lot easier for retailers to say, yeah, I'll carry your product because you're looking after us, helping to ensure that there's consistent retail pricing across channels.
So to summarize what we talked about so far, it sounds like the real solution is to go to the root problem and put a real solution in. No Band-Aids.
So let's talk about that for a minute. In the United States, there is federal case law around something called first sale doctrine. And first sale doctrine basically states that any of us have the right to walk in and buy a product anywhere we want and then turn around and resell it without needing the brand's permission. So whether that's retail arbitrage where I go into Target and I buy some Black Friday special and I turn around and I resell it on Amazon, whether it's that kind of thing, or I go to a distributor who's not supposed to sell to me, but I buy product anyways, and then I turn around and I dump it on Amazon. Right now, those unauthorized sellers are protected by this concept called first sale doctrine. It's a very, very powerful set of case law. If a brand doesn't like having all these unauthorized sellers, it used to be that some of them would go after them and claim trademark violation for this and that. Well, if you know how the Amazon product listings are set up, who knows who set up the product listing? Yeah, Amazon may take down a main image that might violate trademark, but I can just take my phone out, take another picture and upload it, and you can't come after me anymore. So what needs to happen is brands, by way of investing in this online reseller policy, they're actually creating new ways in which they enforce their trademark, specifically for the point of eliminating first sale doctrine as a legal protection for unauthorized sellers. If you remove first sale doctrine as a legal protection because the brand is properly protecting its trademark through material differences or quality controls, if you do those kinds of things, you're now in a position as a brand to go after these so-called unauthorized sellers, and those unauthorized sellers are actually now breaking the law. They're no longer protected by first sale doctrine. That's a very, very important issue for the brand. They've never had to do this in the past because in the past, if a brand wanted to sell into a channel, they sent their sales guy down to that channel and said, hey, can we sell here? And okay, we negotiate, Sure. We're good to go. With things just showing up randomly on Amazon, being sold by whoever, it's a level of chaos that brands are not used to. So as brands think about these issues and realize they have to evolve to address the fact that some of their shortcomings or steps they didn't necessarily do in the past, those things have caught up with them. And a marketplace like Amazon takes advantage of the fact that they have leaky distribution. So either they need to clean up distribution or they need to put proper legal protections around the distribution model they have. In both cases, the brand needs to evolve. In the meantime, the digitally native brand who sells only its own products, only to itself, only on Amazon, they have a much cleaner situation. By the way, they understand how to play the content game on Amazon better. And so it's not a surprise that some of these small digitally native brands are doing extremely well, essentially stealing share from what national brands think is otherwise their fair share.
They're definitely co-opting some demand, no doubt about it. All right, two last questions for you here. So other than COVID, in the last 12 months, what do you think is different? Is there more chaos in general, or what's different on selling on Amazon?
I think one of the big issues we've seen is Amazon has aggressively negotiated sales tax agreements with most of the states that collect sales tax.
Was that driven by the states or Amazon, though?
It was initially driven by the state of Massachusetts, I believe, but then the other states said, oh, wait a minute.
That's
if one state can do this, that's a great idea. Let's figure that out. Amazon's had the technology to do this for ages, but it wasn't in Amazon's best interest. It's now in Amazon's best interest to say, yep, let's just get this all done. So you've removed a lot of the complexity that for smaller digitally native brands, if they wanted to be sales tax compliant, chances are they weren't. 3 years ago, sales tax compliance was under 3%. Now with Amazon handling the sales tax collection and remittance for most of these small sellers, compliance is at an all-time high and will only get higher as we go on. So that's a big, big change. And certainly from the perspective of reducing the friction to get new sellers onto Amazon and doing it in a way where sellers don't have to wake up fearful that the tax man is coming, this change in the last year, certainly a very, very big improvement, and one that I'm glad that Amazon has been able to work through.
Definitely helps the sellers too. Don't have to worry about filing in 50 states anymore if Amazon does it. So that's good. All right, last question for you. You recently made a comment about Amazon's culture, as was quoted in the Washington Business Journal. I'm going to read that quote. Part of Amazon's culture is to beg, borrow, and steal resources from other teams because you're not allocated those resources yourself. You've got to have a meeting to convince others to be involved with your project. So I've personally always felt like Amazon was this siloed organization running around with its head cut off. Can you weigh in on where you think Amazon's culture is going to head from here as a future as an organization?
So Amazon basically hires type A personalities who all are given responsibility to do very specific things and to run very, very fast. And at the same time, you don't get a lot of resources to do your job because frugality creates a level of innovation that actually is very productive. So you have to go and test ideas out, prove that they're going to work, then go get the resources to be able to scale that idea in a big way. It's hard to believe, but I actually think there's a lot of rhyme and reason to that approach. What ends up happening is, I left Amazon in 2013. Since then, Amazon's corporate staff has more than tripled. Wow. Its worldwide staff has increased, I don't know how many fold because of all the warehouse employees, but the company is humongous. It's literally a collection of dozens of billion-dollar companies that all happen to coexist under the Amazon umbrella name. So what's happened is you have so many different groups responsible for different things. We find ourselves as an agency often having to introduce one Amazon team to another Amazon team. Did you know you exist? Did you even know you're in the same building? Oh, we didn't know that. And the other thing to keep in mind is people take a lot of initiative at Amazon, and that's good, except there's nobody to clear that, well, what you did actually steps on this guy's toes and that guy's toes, and maybe you guys should talk to each other before you roll out this new approach. A lot of things get implemented by one team and rolled out, and then somebody else says, oh, wait a minute, that has a ramification. Or worse yet, the person that says there's a ramification is the sellers who go, excuse me, but that doesn't make any sense. And so you end up with this situation where so many things are moving so quickly that often there are gaps. So I would call it's a necessary evil if you want to be in an organization that is growing so quickly, moving so fast. It just means we all have to basically help each other share information and learn, hey, I'm seeing this over here. What are you seeing? Oh, I'm seeing this. Okay, how do we escalate this and bring this to the attention? I had a conversation with an Amazon person yesterday where I told them about a glitch that I'm seeing. There's a glitch in one of their pieces of software. And I told them, I said, who do I go to make this glitch known? We figured out how to deal with the glitch ourselves, but thousands of other sellers may have exactly the same problem and go, what the heck's going on? So how do you get teams to help each other within Amazon to fix the problems where each of them has the right idea of moving quickly to make change, positive change happen? It's just that there's a little bit of stepping over each other because even though there's supposedly clear job descriptions, one of the ways you grow within Amazon is you grab more real estate. And you may be grabbing real estate from another team that you didn't even realize exists.
Well, James, you are a phenomenal resource of information. Not only have you seen behind the scenes, but you're now in business because of all of the growth that it's created. So I really appreciate you joining the My Amazon Guy podcast today. And if those that are listening want to learn more about you, they can go to buyboxexperts.com.
That sounds great. Thanks for having me on today, Stephen.
Perfect. Thank you, everybody, for listening in. And if you're coming in from James's audience, my name is Stephen Pope. I'm the founder of My Amazon Guy. And we're a full-service agency that helps everybody sell more on Amazon. Thanks for watching. We hope you subscribe and check out our next episodes.